Sure. I think we're good, Renee. Thank you so much. I think the part we were up to, if I'm not mistaken, is you told us all about your grandparents' history, your parents' history, and your early childhood. And we got a, just about up to the point when you were 12 years old. You told me about the house you lived in Queens,
Yeah,
with the woman next door who you chopped off the heads of the chickens,
yeah, Mrs. Homeyer.
Mrs. Homemeyer. So, at what age did you move out of that house and into wherever you went to next? And where did you go
I
next?
moved out of that house when I was in 5th grade public school.
Okay.
I was in love with a little girl, who was in school with me. And when we moved away, I dreamt of her for a long time. Uh, my mother was not available. She was out of the house almost all the time.
Hold on. Where did you move to?
We moved to Queens, to a private house, which seemed incredible, with a backyard, 2 bathrooms, which was going to change our lives. And we were the only we were the only Jews on the block. My father was always pioneering new areas, but we had a backyard, and it was a freestanding house, and it had a finished basement with a bar. And my father put up flags from 40 different countries in the basement. My father and mother both were determined were to be Hollywood Americans. He put up flags from 20 or 30 different countries in the basement, and he was selling fabric as a decoration for Wurlitzers, that played records machine. And we had one downstairs with 12 records on it. And I heard those 12 records hundreds of times because it was a big deal to change the records. So what you did is you just lived with the 12 records. I grew up with those 12 records. That
If you
was
heard
all.
one of them now, would you enjoy it?
I probably would. It would bring back memories. I was going to a public school, PS 163. I had to take a bus to Q17 for half an hour to get to it. I was the only Jew in the whole class.
Did you go with Morty or did you go on your own?
What? I went with Morty for the first 2 years, and then Morty graduated and went. And when Passover or Yom Kippur came, the teacher said, it is a very big Jewish holiday today, and we have a man who is Jewish, and he will come up and he will explain what the holiday was. And I didn't have the faintest idea really what Passover was all about. I had heard stories, but I really didn't know anything about it. My parents were anti-religion, basically. They were proud of being Jews, but they were desperate to get away from their origins. They never spoke a word of Yiddish until they were late in life. I never knew a word of Yiddish. And for the holidays, Passover, we would go to my father's father, who only spoke in Yiddish. And so, as I think I told you, my only relationship was with her second retarded wife, who gave me pickles in the backyard. I've told you that.
What did you say when you got up in front of the classroom when the teacher had called you up?
I was horrified, but I knew a few things about Passover. So I got up and I said a few things, and they all looked at me like I was a monster. I got beaten up on a regular basis for being a Jew bastard. They were all Italians, Greeks. It was horrible. And my parents had no idea what was going on. Morty was much stronger and athletic than I was. I was a very skinny kid, and they left him alone because he could fight. I was a 97-pound weakling, and they picked on me.
Did they stand up for you?
What's that? No.
No.
Morty wanted nothing to do with me. I was the beautiful child that my mother always wanted. Unfortunately, I was male.
Yes, we've gone over this.
No, I never got over it.
No, we've gone over this. I know
I've
you've
gone over it, yeah. So that was PS 163. On the other hand, they were all children. They were all children of woodworkers and plumbers and carpenters, and they had a wonderful woodworking shop. And I walked into the woodworking shop, and gave me a project to make a lamp. And lo and behold, it was the finest lamp in the classroom, and everyone was amazed. I just loved the idea of woodworking.
How did you
So
learn to do it so well?
then in my last 2 years of
Wait, hold
public
on,
school,
Grandpa,
what?
how did you learn to do it so well?
Damned if I know. I had started earlier I'd gone to a lumber yard. Get, I wanted to get bookshelves, and I made my own bookshelves, and I was thrilled to make bookshelves.
How
Just
old
with
were you
then I was about 11 or 12
when you made the lamp?
when I made the lamp. That's correct, and the bookshelves, where I put a nail every inch on the bookshelves. Bam, 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 bam. My father didn't know one end of a hammer from the other, and my mother didn't know anything. However, the most important person in my life was a Mrs. Mayer. You graduated in 8th grade. When I came back from Florida, this woman called Mrs. Mayer, who was Catholic, said she was going to form a special class. And she took 11 students, and we went into a little room that was like a storage room. And it was big enough for the 11 us, and we didn't know what was going on. But I think she took the best 11 kids with IQ tests for that class. There were 2 boys, me and Saul Workman, whose father was a gangster in jail. Was famous in Murders Incorporated, and he was in jail for life. Though in World War II, Saul told everyone he was a captain of a submarine, and that's why he never came home. And Mrs. Mayer, for the first time, kept emphasizing how talented I was. And she asked each of us to tell a story, to make up a story, to start the classroom. And I started burning with enthusiasm. I was a wreck. I bit my fingernails, I bit my toenails, I bit everything. I was dirty, I never washed, I never brushed my teeth. I was very regressed and very disturbed, which my mother never noticed. I wouldn't talk to my mother after I came back from Florida. So I was a wreck. And Mrs. Mayer,
Very far.
what?
I said you haven't come very far.
No, I never stopped talking. I adored Mrs. Mayer, and I felt she adored me. I think she saved my life. And then I went to high school, and Jamaica High School, which was 50% Black. And but there were a number of Jews there that came from, there was a rich area called, you think I know? There was one rich area in that area. Donald Trump came from that area, by the way, in Queens.
States.
Yep. He was much younger than I, of course. But what was it called?
Is it Bayside or Little Neck?
No, Morty went to Bayside High, and I went to Jamaica High. My parents decided to separate us since we got along so badly.
Malda?
But it's not important. In Jamaica High School, my father started taking me out to teach me tennis. And almost from the first day, I was the best tennis player. And that did my ego a lot of good. I could beat my father and I could beat my brother. And when I graduated public school, I got 2 awards, the best woodwork.
you're moving too fast. I want to know about your social life, your romantic life in high school.
I had no social life in public school.
I call BS on that. I'm sure you had at least one friend, and I want to hear about them.
Yes, I had Saul Workman, who
Besides,
was in that class, and his father was the gangster who was in jail for life for Murders Incorporated. You're too young to know it, but Murders Incorporated was one of the most famous gangster groups in the New York area.
why
They
did you
killed.
like Saul?
He was intelligent. Uh, he was in that special class with me. He was the other boy. All the rest were girls. There were 12 of us. And it was the first time in my life that I was in the presence where academic stuff was important. And I was given free rein to my imagination. And I became aware of the fact that I had gifts. I always had seen myself as a total reject. Morty was extremely verbal and extremely talented. He could do backflips, front flips. He was strong. I was weak and skinny. I didn't break 100 pounds until I went to high school. And with Mrs. Mayer, she made it clear to me that I was special. And then in woodworking, the man said, "You are very talented." And I felt special because before then I was a misfit. I'm not exaggerating. I have no.
Can you name me one other person aside from Saul who you feel like you had even a small friendship with, an acquaintanceship
The
with?
only one was a girl in the prior house which I moved away from in second grade. I was in love with her. I would buy her sundaes.
What was her name?
I don't remember, but she was the most important person in the world to me. I adored her and she adored me. And then when we moved to Jamaica, I kept dreaming of her, of trying to find a bus to get back to her. She was my idealized girlfriend and mother. I was a wreck. I was a wreck. I still am. There's a part of me that's extremely accomplished and mature, but there's also a piece of me that never got over that period, which is a bit of a wreck. Renee knows all about it and mothers me in that area. And more than anything, I needed that. Simone, I don't think ever really saw it in me and could not mother it. She was a wreck from her background, you know. The whole world exploded on her. And she had a mother who didn't want to be a mother. She called Simone a salvage.
Okay, this is not supposed to be a nah. This is about you.
Okay, so now I go, and I went through my sophomore year in Jamaica High School, and lo and behold, my father picked us all up and we moved to Great Neck.
Hold on,
Great,
wait. What were some of the best things that you made in woodworking when you were in high school, aside from the lamp and the bookshelves, which you did earlier on?
Mostly, I fixed things. I became known in the neighborhood as a kid who would fix things. Everyone had, for instance, cigarette lighters, and I could fix any cigarette lighter that was ever made, whether it was a 25-cent Zippo or a solid silver or solid gold $100 lighter. There were only 4 moving parts in every lighter. I figured out the 4 parts. I sent away and got parts, and I could fix any lighter that was ever made. And I became famous in that one little area. So I found areas where my ego was fed. Morty was talkative, I was silent. Morty was athletic, and I was not, except when I discovered tennis. Morty was brilliant. Morty was everything, and I was a loser.
Did you play tennis exclusively with your father and Morty or with anyone else?
Just my father and Morty.
And you always
And after about 10 lessons, I could beat both of them. Thank God. there is a God, and that God made me brilliant in woodworking and tennis. Everything else, I was dead on arrival.
Did you
Um,
while you were in high school?
High school is another story. We moved to Great Neck uh, at the end of my sophomore year.
Oh,
And in Great Neck was 50% Jewish, which was a complete, incredible experience. The
whereabouts?
other, Great Neck is a famous community on Long
No.
Island.
Oh, I know, Grandpa. I know that half of my
Right,
extended family lives there. Um,
right.
I'm talking about the Jews. Where were they from?
The Jews were from everywhere. There were a lot of Egyptian Jews because the ruler of Egypt, I forget his name, they used to weigh him every year, and he would get his weight in gold. Faid or something. He was the monarch of Egypt, and he was overthrown by, I forget his name, famous socialist.
Nasser?
And and all the rich Jews, they were all corrupt and rich, moved to Great Neck because Great Neck was where United Nations was. The United Nations was in Lake Success, which is a part of Great Neck. And they were building the building in Manhattan, but all the children from all these people from 50 different countries came to Great Neck, and their children went to Great Neck High School because that was part of the closest school to Lake Success. When the building in Manhattan was finished, they all moved to Manhattan. But Great Neck High School was half United Nations and half Jews. And it was another world. They had Cadillacs. The women had expensive gowns and jewelry. Uh,
What's going on at this point with your father's business that
my,
you or
my
family?
father had a successful textile business in display fabrics and fabric for slippers, handbags, and linings.
So it was a span of just about 5 or 8 years that your father expanded enough so that your family could afford to move out of what was not as
That's
an
right.
upscale
When
neighborhood.
he was in Great Neck, we saw him as a success and rich, and he saw himself as success and rich.
What did your mom see him as?
Success and rich.
Okay.
And we had beautiful clothes. And Great Neck, the house in Great Neck was gorgeous. It was on a half an acre. We had a backyard.
What was the
And I,
address?
what?
What was the address?
It was Baker Hill, and a new development, Baker Hill. They changed it to Saddle Rock Estates, but it was 3 blocks from Long Island Sound. And that brought back memories to me of Florida, where
Wait,
I always,
what street was it on? What was the address?
uh, in those days, it was Berger Drive. And Berger was the guy who did the development, but they changed it to
Okay.
Saddle Rock Drive. And
If
it
you
was,
saw the house today, would you remember it?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, it was 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, no basement, no, it had a, it, it had an attic. It had upstairs.
Hmm.
Uh, what I didn't tell you is in the prior house, in the non-Jewish neighborhood, up in the attic, I built a woodworking shop.
So tell me about that.
Uh, I had to climb a ladder to get up there, but I had a circular saw and I bought tools and I built things. I cut off a half an inch on my second finger once. That finger is still a half an inch shorter than the other. And I built things.
Wait, what happened to that piece of a finger?
It healed. It healed. My parents were away on vacation, and my uncle Saul was there, and he stuck it in a bottle of iodine, and he wrapped it up. I still have that scar on the second finger, and it's my left hand, fortunately. And that finger
Can
is
I see
still
it?
about, it's
I
a
want to
half
see
an
it.
inch shorter.
Put your hands up in front of the cameras. No, no, no,
one is shorter than the other.
no, wait. The camera's at the top of the computer,
I don't know where it is.
at the very top of the computer. Oh gosh. Oh yuck. Ew.
So that was fun. Uh, so the best years of my life, I decided to become a psychiatrist. Uh,
No,
I,
no, no,
I,
no. You just skipped a bajillion years.
yes, I did, but right from
No,
so I went to Great Neck High School where half the class were Jews. They were all smarter than I was. The girls were gorgeous. Uh, and I didn't know what to make of it. It was the first time I was amongst Jews. And academics, they all took schoolwork seriously.
were these religious Jews or irreligious Jews?
Uh, I would say 1/3 were religious Jews and the other 2/3 worshiped money. We all were proud of the fact that half the fathers had Cadillacs. The biggest Jewish holiday of the year was the day that the new Cadillacs came out. That was the biggest Jewish holiday of the year. That was the kind of Jews they were. Nowadays, of course, you know better than I, Great Neck is Orthodox, has like 5 or 6 observant temples, and they're all serious Jews. Those, the house cost us $26,000. I remember that.
Was that expensive for those days?
Well, it was kind of expensive, but not that expensive. But it was wonderful. It changed my life. And I had good
Friends in high school.
I had good teachers,
Who
but
were your
I didn't know what to make of it. I was not a good student still. I was rebellious, I was frightened, I was neurotic. But there were girls who liked boys, and I dated, and it was all very exciting.
So
And
tell me about that. I want to hear about it in detail, about your friends and your girlfriends and what you did for fun.
I want to get into the business world. That
No, I
period.
want to hear about your high school years too, because I've gotten strong requests from my mother about that.
My high school years uh, um, were wonderful compared to anything that went before. I was friendly with 3, 4 guys. One of them who did nothing but listen to Wagner.
What was his name?
What's that?
Well, I want to hear their names.
You think I remember? I forget his name.
Okay.
He was overweight, and I listened to Wagner with him, and it had a big effect on me. I was friendly with Harvey Sachs, who was brilliant. Eventually, he got 3 PhDs, and Harvey got killed when he was like 26, 27 years old. He was working on phones in California for people who wanted to kill themselves, and he had gotten 3 PhDs. He was brilliant.
At the age of 27?
Yeah, it was incredible. And he was my best friend.
How did he die?
In a car accident.
Wow.
I still think of him a lot. It brings tears to my eyes.
Yeah.
And Arnie Davidson, who was sort of a dims and does guys, but he was friendly. And the two of us went to Vermont College together. I decided I was going to become a psychiatrist.
No. You're skipping about 2.
That's in high school.
What?
So in high school, I decided to become a psychiatrist. I knew how mentally sick I was, and through psychoanalysis, you could reinvent yourself. I was in love with this guy, Eric Erickson.
Yeah.
Eric Erickson was a guy who was the mother remarried a Jewish man, in fact. His father had died by the name of Erickson. She married a Jewish man who he hated, and he became an artist, and he went to work for Sigmund Freud to paint his children, and he discovered psychoanalysis, and And Freud said you could be any kind of a man you wanted. You hated your adopted father. Why don't you become your original father through psychoanalysis? So he went into psychoanalysis. He became a famous psychiatrist, and he wrote a whole series of books, all of which I read as a junior in high school. Eric Erickson.
He departed from Freud's theory. He created his own, the 9 stages of.
Well, Erickson was his father's name, so he said, "I will be this." He said, "I will be the son of myself. I will father myself and remake myself." And that book was more important than anything else in my life. And I became interested in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy in my junior year in high school. And I decided to become a pre-med. And I took chemistry and physics, and I became a B plus student, which previously I had always been a failing student. I still picked my nose and bit my toenails and my fingernails, and I was a wreck. But the girls liked me. I was very handsome, and I liked the girls a lot.
Any specific
And,
ones?
pardon?
Any specific ones?
I fell in love with one girl, a non-Jewish girl. I took her out for my, at the end of the year, you rent a tuxedo and you go to a nightclub. She was not Jewish, but she was in love with a man in the Merchant Marine Academy. And so I was full of tragic love for that year.
What was her name?
Don't remember. It was ridiculous. Falling in love with non-available women was a specialty of mine. And then in my senior year, I got onto the tennis team, Great Neck tennis team. And that was one of the best things that saved my life, is I could always beat my brother and my father in tennis. And I could build and repair anything in the house. Morty was a talker. Abe was a talker. I was always silent. You
Who
wouldn't know it
on the
now.
tennis team?
I was on the tennis team. I had a varsity jacket.
Did you have any friends from the team?
One friend, but mostly not.
I
was on the rifle team in Jamaica High School, and my father bought me a 22 rifle team. And then he bought me a shotgun. We could go down to the beach, and we had a machine that threw up clay pigeons. And my father and I, with the shotguns, would shoot clay pigeons. And that was just wonderful. And I always wanted a boat. And I found a ruined boat.
When?
When I was a junior in high school in Great Neck, and I repaired it, and I went out into the Sound, and it sunk, and I had to swim home. And then in my senior year in high school, I built a boat. I got plans for an 8-foot boat, and I built it. And my father got me a pre-World War II outboard that weighed a ton. And I went zipping out into the bay with it, and the boat broke in half and sunk. I saved the engine. And then I built a second boat, and that one didn't break in half. I didn't have plans, so my boats were always a little crooked. But I was desperate to get out onto the water. Water meant freedom to me.
What happened with that boat that made it?
I had it for a while. I had a girlfriend. I took her out, and we went zipping, and the seat that we were sitting on broke, and we fell to the floor. And then the steering wheel fell off. And then I got back to the shore, and I took the engine off, and that was the end of that boat.
That you brought out?
So I lost 2 boats that I made. And then in my senior year, my father.
That girl who was on the water with you?
She was very nice, and she thought the whole thing was very funny.
Was she your girlfriend? Was she a friend?
She was a girlfriend. And we kissed. It wasn't much more than that.
What was her name?
I don't remember.
Okay.
And then in my senior year, my father gave me $1,000, which was a fortune, to go out and buy a professional boat. He felt sorry for me. And I went out and I bought a brand new 12-foot speedboat with a powerful outboard. And off we went. And in my senior year, I went everywhere with that speedboat. I once went around Manhattan on it. I had a 10-foot outboard engine. I got friendly with this guy, Peter Asher, who comes up again later in my life. And we saw pictures of something going on in France called water skiing. And he was much more talented than I. He built model airplanes and he won a contest by the World Telegram newspaper. He built such a gorgeous model airplane that flew. And the two of us built this speedboat called No Snow, and we taught each other how to water ski. And that was just a big thrill. And I felt life was worth living. At this moment, I'm looking at a tree and there is a golden eagle on the tree. We have a family of golden eagles, which are on your $1 bills, the American gold eagle. But we have a pair of eagles who are living in our backyard. It just took off, which has been a big thrill to me. Um, and that's about all I had to say. I never spoke to my mother. I adored my father. My father and I went off playing tennis, and he talked to me, and he talked about his childhood to me. And Morty was talented beyond words.
Grandpa,
Morty,
Grandpa,
yes,
I don't believe that you didn't talk to your mother at all. I want you to dig. I want you to take right now 30 seconds, dig deep in your memory, and try to think up of one positive interaction you had with her in your high school years. That's 4 years of your life.
they all had to do with one issue.
A
To
positive
my mind.
interaction, I said.
The only time I had real contact with my mother is when I got sick. And I got sick on a regular basis because then she would come in and she would bathe my forehead and she would take care of me a little.
So I want you to tell me about one of those times and any
That's
positive.
all.
That's
I
it.
remember when I was like 10, 11 years old and I was sick. I was always sick. And she bathed my forehead. This is before I went to Florida. And then she went out for the day. My mother was desperate to be out in the world. She had had a life that was 100-fold more difficult than mine. Truly, she was beaten every single day of her life, and she was desperate to be out in the world with fashion, with music, with money, with jewelry.
But
Uh,
Grandpa, the
yes.
image my mother paints of her is somebody who enjoyed doting on other people when it comes to materialism. So my question to you is, well, what did she do with her time when she got to Great Neck? Did she go out? Did she join clubs? Did she bring you gifts at all?
She in Great Neck, she was into clothes and social events with my father.
So what kind of social events did she go to?
There was a lot of Israel, as you know, in 1948 came into existence, and they were fighting to become a country. The
Yeah.
War of Independence of Israel. Israel did not exist until 1948. And there were constant affairs to raise money. They sent me to a Jewish camp, Marty and I, to Tel Yehuda, where we all were Jews that were going to go to Israel and fight the Arabs. We built our own bunks and we grew our own food. And
Why did you go to this camp?
I went to the camp when I was about 13, just after my bar mitzvah.
Can you tell me about your bar mitzvah?
I had to learn my uh, uh,
Your
Uh,
portion of the Torah, your
my
parsha,
portion. What is that called in Jewish?
parsha in Jewish.
No, wasn't Pasha.
Is it
There's
what?
a there was
Land.
a word there was a word for I can't think of it. And I had a rabbi come and he taught me how to read Hebrew. He never translated in any manner, shape, or form. So I learned to be able to read Hebrew pretty fluently without having the faintest idea of what I was reading. I knew that Baruch Atzor Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. I could translate that. But beyond that, I was pretty much totally ignorant. And I got up in front of 50 or 60 people. And this was in 1948. And I was a big star. The only person who came to my bar mitzvah party was Saul Workman, because I had no friends. Saul was not a Jew. His father was a gangster. And my parents had a big party. They asked me to give a speech. I got a Schwinn bicycle, by the way, which I was thrilled with. And I said, "Oh, today I am a man." And they all laughed. And I took my two dogs and I went walking in the woods and I spent the rest of the day alone.
Tell me about your dogs.
Charger and Cherry.
What kind of
They
dogs were they?
boxers, two boxers.
When did you
And
get them?
I got them when I was about 11 years old. And I lived in the woods. There were woods everywhere and potato fields, believe it or not, in that area. There was and there was a lake. I built a boat made up of an old steel burner for hot water heating system. I also found gravestones in the woods, and I would take Charger and Cherry there. I was an angry kid. I was a somewhat violent kid. On Halloween, I threw a rock at a police car and broke his windshield, and they chased me for 3 blocks. And I went into the woods, which I knew intimately, and went into my hiding place. And the cops with searchlights looked for me, and they couldn't find me, cursing, and left. I had a lot of violence in me, and that was a very big adventure, breaking the police window. My father, I had 2 guns because I was on the rifle team at Jamaica High School, and I was a crack shot. That was a big thing.
What's a crack shot?
What's that?
What's a crack?
A very good shot.
Okay.
It's an expression of those days, a crack shot.
Do you still enjoy that today for that reason?
I still have guns, as you perhaps know. Your eldest son has shot my guns.
I don't have any
My
sons.
eldest brother, excuse me. And I once was in India. I was quite sick, so I spent time in India. And this doctor came to see me.
Wait, how old were you?
Oh, this is many years later. I was in my middle 20s, I would say late 20s. And his son was a tennis player, so he couldn't play where I was. Indians were not permitted to play there. It was all Russians, by the way, who wouldn't talk to me. It was me and the Russians. And the doctor said he had a son who played tennis. Could I play tennis with him because he wasn't permitted to play on the courts? I said, sure. And I played tennis with him. And he and part of his family took me for 3 days into the interior, into India to go tiger hunting. And we had 3 different guns, 2 shotguns and a rifle. And we slept in villages, and the villages had one problem. They lived on their crops. There's no electricity or anything. And the birds, flocks of birds would eat their seeds. And we had guns. And I had a shotgun. I was the best shot. So they all had me shooting the birds. And I was a big star. The village made me into a hero because I must have killed 100, I'm exaggerating, a lot of birds. And it was a big thing. We saw tigers, but I was scared to death and I never shot at one.
Hold on. You're going to on too long about a different time that we're not up to.
Right, that's 10 years later.
Yeah.
Uh, so I don't know what more to tell you. When I graduated,
What did you do with your bar mitzvah money?
I gave it all to Israel.
Yes. Can you tell
I
me
had,
that story that I
I
don't
had,
remember what it was about, but you went
I
with
had about $1,000 or $1,200, and my father and I went to a place where an Israeli got up and talked about Ben Gurion and the effort to have a land for the Jews. I was very moved by that.
Hmm.
And
What was that
it was kind of,
story? You tell me a story sometimes. I forget when it was. Your father had some sort of interaction with someone at a table at an event.
yes, we all had tables. So we went around the tables, and my father gave a very big contribution, like
What
500.
what event was this?
Pardon?
What was
This
this?
is this is 1948.
Okay.
Israel was fighting for its life, and there were representatives from Israel in New York to raise money to buy guns and planes and God knows what. And my father took me to a dinner, just me and my father. He was working for Maharam, I think. He wasn't in business for himself yet. Maybe he was, I'm not sure.
Well, how old were you?
Pardon? I had just had my bar mitzvah 6 months before, something like that.
Okay.
Uh, and so my father contributed for what for him was a huge amount of money, maybe a $2,000 or $3,000. And the owner of the place he worked, or where he did, I don't know whether he had his own business at that time, but the owner of, I think, the rest of the place he worked, or the place he used to work, donated $5,000. $5,000 must have been like $50,000 now. And my father decided he was going to do something. And he raised his hand. He already had contributed a lot of money, $1,000. I'm making up these figures because I don't remember what they were. And he said, I'll give $6,000 just to make his ex-boss look small.
Okay.
And it was so interesting to me. And I loved my father for that.
But that was the whole interaction. I remember there was something else that he said to someone at a table at an
That
event.
was that was at a table.
That's what he said?
I
That-
guess so.
Hmm.
And I belonged to Tel Yehuda, and we all thought we would grow up and go to Israel and fight for Israel. And that lasted for about 6 months, and then it drifted away.
When was the first time you went to Israel?
Oh, I didn't go to Israel until your mother was there, and I went to visit her for the first time.
So that was years later, decades.
Years later, when Gregory graduated college, I said, why don't you take a year off and do anything you wanted? I would pay for it. And so he went off to Japan for a year. When your mother graduated, I offered her the same thing, and she wanted to go to Africa because she was into photography. She did wonderful photography work, and she wanted to go to Africa and photograph animals. And I was horrified because the thought of her going to Africa by herself or with a group, I was afraid for her. I said, why don't you go to Israel? Everyone's going to these kibbutzes, and they were having a wonderful time, and she would be safe. And she said, okay. I had a big influence over your mother in those days. I don't anymore. And off she went. She stayed in the kibbutz for a week or two and hated it. And she went back to Jerusalem and started taking courses in Jewish history, I think, at the university there. And then she met these Orthodox Jews who came up to her and said, no, so are you Jewish? And she said, yeah. And they wanted to know whether she knew Hebrew, and she didn't. And they said, you know, you could be a Jew, but you're not really a Jew. Would you like to learn about your people? And she said, yeah. And so they started to indoctrinate her into Orthodoxy. And because I wouldn't let her go to Africa, she became she
Fanatic.
became an observant Jew. That's a true story.
So
If
next
I
time
had left
you're
her,
feeling
if
any-
I had left her alone, she would have been an explorer in Africa.
yeah. Well, you know, next time you feel resentment about the fact that your grandkids are religious fanatics, just remember that you have yourself to blame.
That's right. That happens to be true. It never occurred to me she would become an Orthodox Jew, because neither my mother or my father believed in God. They were proud of being Jews because Jews were superior in
But
their mind.
Grandpa, we are not all made in our parents' image.
I would debate that, but I'm not going to.
Your own daughter is proof.
Okay. You are entitled to your beliefs, my dear, and
That.
I am equally. So we agree to disagree.
But which
I
one
think,
makes you happier? Which belief system makes you happier?
separating from my parents made me much happier. And the same thing is true of your mother.
Yes.
Your mother's identity that she created for herself is her whole life. And that's true of me also. I'm not my mother, I'm not my father, I'm not my brother. But nevertheless, in the same way that genetically I can't shake it, there's all sorts of stuff. The way I talk comes from my mother, my father, the way I look comes from my mother largely. So it's a mixture. You're right and I'm right, and we're both right and we both disagree.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
So
I'm very eager to get out of this realm and into the business world, because that's where my life really started.
that's where we can go next episode. I wanted to do your high school years because I've been getting pressure from people to.
Well, my high school years were wonderful compared to anything else. I drove a car at age 16, which was the thrill of my life.
What car was it? What was the first car you drove?
I got a Chevrolet convertible. My father bought it for $100 a shift, and I taught myself how to drive it. And I went out to East Hampton, by the way. I went out to Montauk all by myself and had a tent, which I lived on the beach for 2-3 days. Big adventures.
What was in Montauk for you?
Nothing, the end of Long Island.
All by yourself.
All by myself. I was very solitary in a lot of things. I
Wow.
still am very solitary, other than with Renee. No, Great, and in Great Neck, everyone was Jewish, which I couldn't get over it, and it was another world. It was just another world, because I wasn't fighting. In PS 163, which is where I graduated, I was being beaten up almost on a weekly basis. I belonged to a gang run by he was Polish. He wound up going to jail for murder, by the way. And he had a gun, and we had gang fights. I grew up in a very, very rough neighborhood in Jamaica. Jamaica was horrible. But you know, my mother and father, they're self-made people. They're self-made people. You are a product of your mother and father to a tremendous extent. I was a product of my neighborhoods. Neither my mother nor my father wanted to have almost anything to do with Morty and I. They wanted to be out in the world. They wanted to be, they had had such horrendous childhoods. They wanted to be out in the world. I can't emphasize that enough.
Hmm.
That story transcends all other stories. And it's hard for you to believe it or know it based on your experiences. They
No,
were, they
I
were like wild people. If you were to ask my mother, how is she like her mother or father? She would say, not at all. I can speak Yiddish and I got that from them, but I didn't want to have anything to do with them. I didn't even want to be with them. That I hated them perhaps more than I loved them. If you asked my father would say, well, I loved my mother, but she died when I was 6. And my father had nothing to do with me. And we only spoke in Yiddish. And he wanted me, as long as I would bring a few dollars home, that's all. And he never let me go to high school. He didn't give a shit about me. If I had died, it would have been a little bump in the road. I mean, they grew up with nothing. And the lives they led was totally unrelated to their childhoods.
that's
I
not your
can't
life, Grandpa,
emphasize that enough.
but that
What?
was your life.
My
That
life was, and then my life was a mixture. They didn't know about parenting, so neither one of them had parenting. That Morty and I had all the clothes that we needed of good quality. We had all the food that we could possibly eat of good quality. We always had a bed to sleep in. We were sent to schools, and that was it. They didn't know about nurture. It's hard to believe. They didn't know about it.
but
And
Grandpa,
Morty and
the
I
majority
could,
of your life
yes.
has occurred after
What?
age. The majority of your life has occurred past the age of 18.
That's correct.
Yes.
That is correct. That is correct. My whole life, my whole life. If I had to go back to my life before the age of, say, 16, I'd rather be dead.
Oy vey. Hmm.
It's hard to believe. And by the way, the story is the same for Morty. I have a very bad relationship with Morty, but I have Rachmanis for Morty. Morty had it just as bad as I did, if not worse, because Morty tried to win my parents over. And it was a losing battle.
But Grandpa,
And I did not try to win them over.
just to put everything in perspective for a second, you are happily married. You have made a success of yourself. You have found meaning, especially in the latter half of your life with your woodworking and helping your patients. You have 4 beautiful grandchildren and 2 children who love you very, very much. You have lived a very good life. And I don't think, I know that is evidence that your past and your childhood does not necessarily have to dictate the entirety of your existence. It
I
doesn't.
agree. I agree with
I
you.
think dwell on it
I agree with you.
is giving
I
it more
really,
power than it needs to have.
I don't dwell on it, but you have given me an invitation to tell my story. I sometimes have thought of writing it down, but it's too much work
It's
because I
also,
think it's interesting.
an opportunity to look back and find the kernels of good rather than wait
Oh,
for the bad.
you didn't tell me that in the beginning. I didn't realize this was it to be the kernels of good. I
No, I
have
keep asking for them. I keep asking for them.
all of my kernels came later on.
Yes.
I've had a blessed life. And from the age of 21 or so, I started having a blessed life, and it got better and better. It
So
got better and better.
let's pick up with that stuff the next time we meet.
Oh boy, this is going to be a 3-volume book.
Yes, it is.
Yes, I enjoy looking at your face for long periods of time. You got a nice face.
Thanks, Grandpa. I enjoy looking at your face too.
As you can see, I recovered from all of this stuff. Morty, God love him, is living in Mexico somewhere. He hasn't seen his 3 ex-wives or his 2 children in 20 years. The
I know.
poor guy. He was more injured than I because he tried to make sense of everything that was happening to us, and I did not. I turned to nature. I attained other things. I gave up on my mother and father at a young age. And Morty, particularly with our mother, gave up. My mother was the most injured of all of us, and she made an incredible life for herself, but she was the most injured. It's like meeting someone who's a quadriplegic. I know someone like this, a young man whose older sister is a famous opera singer. I met him when he was 17. I was jealous of him because my wife adored him and he was adorable. And then he had a terrible accident and became a quadriplegic. And he spent 2 years in a black room wanting to die. And then he made a life for himself. This is 20 years ago. And now he has a wife and he teaches courses on how to make a living as a quadriplegic. And he's made a life for himself. It's an incredible story. And I'm reminded of that. I've made a life for myself. Morty half made a life for himself, only half. And so when you ask me about myself, I want to tell you the good stuff and you want to hear the good stuff. But there is another nightmare stuff that is deep inside. And in the world of psychotherapy, it's the earliest years that form how you feel about yourself. If your mother and or father or someone else saw you as adorable and welcomed you into this world and thought of you as a prize, then that's the way you feel about yourself for life. In
Yeah,
my
but
judgment,
Grandpa, the goal of psychotherapy is the purpose of going back into those formative experiences is so that ultimately you can transcend those experiences and move past them to
that
something.
is the goal. In my judgment, it is only partially possible.
That's a very sad view.
Well, I think it is true. I have a lifetime of experience, and that's my experience. It's Morty's experience. We both underwent extensive psychotherapy, extensive. And I became a psychoanalyst and a psychotherapist. I've had 3 or 4 different analysts. And the child I was when I was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old is still in me. And I will go to my grave with him still in me. And that's a big story. And you had a mother and father who was welcomed you into the world, especially that you were finally a girl. Their first child was a boy and they
What are
wanted a
you talking
girl.
about?
I'm talking about, oh, you were the oldest, you were a
Yes,
girl. Yes.
Grandpa.
Yeah, well, I'm a little confused. Um,
Yeah,
and
if I were the oldest, I don't know what I would be.
you were the prize.
Yes, I
So
was.
you
I
you
still am.
you got a great gift. And your brothers all were welcomed into this world.
Yeah, they're fine.
And they're fine too. But we came from a different kind of a world. I'm not asking for sympathy.
I'm not
I
getting it.
I think my mother and father were extraordinary people. And to quote my mother, who I heard this 100 times, based on where they came from, they were immense successes, immense successes. And I admire them for it. But the emes is the emes. You know emes.
So now you do know some Hebrew. There you go.
I don't know whether emes is Hebrew or Yiddish.
It's
My
Hebrew.
parents loved Yiddish, not Hebrew.
Okay. Okay, Grandpa, I need to go, but let's pick this up some other time.
Anytime you want, baby, I'm available. I'm a cheap date.
Okay.